All right, so we're recording. So what's been going on is with this, it's been interesting being involved with this project that we've had with the Mormon and in the Hebrew words and everything. And it's made me more inclined to look into Hebrew words and deeper meaning, because there's huge symbolism. What I've found with this Hebrew stuff pertaining to the Book of Mormon and these translations, there is depth, guys. There is depth. This is not shallow stuff. It is so enjoyable to see that these things aren't on a thin foundation. They're very, very, very solid. And so, of course, as we've been talking over, it's been years now too, that I care in my focus on study, I care most about deeply studying those things that pertain to the rock and foundation. We all know what it is. It's like a broken record, right? It's the doctrine of Christ. It's the higher law, which is the sermon of bountiful, and it's the sacrament. I love diving into the rock and foundation, and I have not even close harvested everything that is there, because in that rock and foundation is the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's everything, and everything sits upon it. That foundation that we're building, of course, is to make it to lay a new building or a new house, which is to be our bodies, which Christ will come to suddenly. That's how we receive the second comforter. You lay the foundation. The foundation has to be according to the rock, who is Christ and everything that he is. And then as soon as you get that foundation laid, then he can come suddenly to his temple, which temple ye are, right? And so anyway, I wanted to go in, and what we're talking about is directly related to the rock and foundation. So I just want to make sure that it's known. I don't really get into anything if I can't deeply, unless if I could tie it back to the rock and foundation. So what I wanted to do is talk about this Law of Moses, as it was a big topic in Boise. We had James that was there, and him and his breakout sessions and everything that's been going on with these efforts with seeking out to the remnant house of Israel, the Jews, right? And so it's been on my mind a lot. And so there's this topic of offerings right here, if you see the screen. And there are offerings that need to be offered, so to speak, in order to get back to the presence of God. And I want to go over the details. And so basically, there's this transformation process of an Israelite man in the Law of Moses becoming a priest. And until they're a priest, they are stuck. They are damned. Their progress, like the Law of Moses, they're absolutely stuck. And we'll go over how a few high priests in that order were able to break through and ascend to the top of Sinai, so to speak, right? And receive that. But in general, all of Israel, they were, their progression was halted, and only very few were allowed to continue up and receive the fullness, because everyone else, by their own choice, they wanted the things of Egypt because they were sensational, or whatever the reason was for that. And then after we go over that at the very end, at the conference, there's this new word, ruach. And that's the name of this Davidic servant that is among us. It's the name before they crossed the ocean and came to the Americas. That was the name. And that was explained in the Boise conference, right? The ruach and what it means. And so we'll get into that too. I dove in, and I thought at the very end, since it kind of pertains to the whole thing with, we'll talk about aroma and smell soon, how it pertains to that, and some things that because when I went over it, I was like, I dove down and gathered some information. So anyway, I want to jump into it and orient everyone, so to speak, so that we can start diving into just one specific offering. We'll go over the 5 offerings in the Law of Moses. There's 5 core offerings. and it's and we'll review those. But I wanted to give a landscape and an overview first. Let's see the best way to do it. And I wrote some summary here. And maybe I'll just follow the footnotes. And like I say, I slammed this presentation together because this of course was impromptu. And so there is this process in the law of Moses of reversing the effect of the golden calf incident, which when they had that monstrous sin or executed that monstrous sin, the higher law was broken, split. Moses had to go and receive another lesser law. But there is this process to reverse the effects of that fall, so to speak. And in the lesser law, which is the law of Moses, it is a preparatory law to get them back to ground zero where they were before. But in that lesser law, there are depths, there are symbols, there is right brain stuff to grab onto in your mind so that we'll start being able to understand this law of Moses and how it really was preparing us to see something deeper that's even missed among us, even though we do have the higher law among us right now, right? And so I want to get into Exodus 12, and it's here in blue on your screen. And I want to go over and I want to read the full verse, and the verses are long now in the new illustration edition. I want to go and read that and then highlight a few things. And then we'll get back into the bullet points here. So it says, Exodus 12:1. It says, in the third month, when the children of Israel were gone forth out of the land of Egypt, the same day came they into the wilderness of Sinai. So you know where they are. They're on the Sinai Peninsula. For they were departed from Rephidim and had come to the desert of Sinai and had pitched in the wilderness. And there Israel camped before the mount. And Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him out of the mountain, saying, thus shall you say to the house of Jacob, and tell the children of Israel, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings. And think about what is going to be happening in Zion, guys. Think about it. If we get into Deuteronomy 3, if you want to see what's going to happen in Zion, go and just read Deuteronomy 3. Wow. It says, you have seen what I did unto the Egyptians, and how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you unto myself. Now, therefore, if you will obey my voice and indeed keep my command or my covenant, then you shall be a peculiar treasure unto me above all people. And here's the promise. And this is where it went sideways really quick. Here's the promise. For all the earth is mine, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Not just one high priest going into the Holy of Holies, guys. A kingdom of priests going into the Holy of Holies. These are the words which he shall speak unto the children of Israel. And Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before their faces all these words which the Lord commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses returned the words of the people unto the Lord. So they were good. It's looking good right now, guys. All sparkly. Lord, have a mouthpiece going back and forth. So in summary, the priest stood at this point of time newly on the Sinai Peninsula, leaving the flesh pots of Egypt, which is the world, which represents sin. It stated that the priesthood is intended for all Israel, not just these high priest guys with these fancy gems on their chest and a Urim and Thummim in a pocket behind it up against their heart and all of the bonnet and the sash and all of the stuff. No, it's all Israel. And so the original promise was given to the entire nation. But then after the golden calf incident, it just went to the Levite tribe. And the Levite tribe were just priests administering the basic ordinances. And then you have this figure that's the high priest, the one that represents, one that has access to the power of heaven, or the powers of heaven too. The power of heaven, of course, is Jesus Christ. The powers of heaven are those that are up on higher rungs of the ladder than we are. And so at the time, in looking at what I put together here, let's see what I put in. At this time of instructions, you know, where it's good look like before the golden calf, there were no Levite priests, guys. The promise was made, like I said, to the entire house of Jacob and all Israel through this patriarchal order, meaning through the firstborn male of each family. They were each to become a kingdom of priests with the purpose of, here's the key word, establishing a holy nation. And what's a nation? It's a family. If you want to know what the nation is, go into the Bible or the glossary in the new glossary, pull up nation. It's significant. And so, oh, and I put it down there. It's funny. See Denver's glossary definition of nation. So that's where it is right now. Israel is in good standing, but they had the golden calf incident and things started going sideways. And so you get into Exodus 2, this or 12:2, and let's continue, and then we'll kind of get you. And I'm just getting you oriented so that we could start painting a picture here of how it applies to us, reversing the effects of the lesser law, which, by the way, guys, in the LDS church, make no mistake, it's the lesser law. Think about it. We're in the same darn condition. We've rejected, or the LDS church and all churches rejected the opportunity to go to the top of Mount Sinai and meet with the Lord. And so they're stuck with the lesser law. And so anyway, Exodus 12:2. And the Lord, this is just the next verse. And the Lord said unto Moses, behold, hold on, sorry. And the Lord said unto Moses, behold, I come unto you in a thick cloud, that the people may hear when I speak with you and believe you forever. And there's so much symbolism here, how it goes for the ears, and you feel, and you see. And Moses told the words of the people unto the Lord. And the Lord said unto Moses, go unto the people and sanctify them today and tomorrow. And think about the initiatory in the LDS temple. And let them wash their clothes and be ready against the third day. For the third day, the Lord will come down in the sight of all the people upon Mount Sinai. And you shall set bounds unto the people round about, saying, take heed to yourselves that you go not up to the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mount shall be surely put to death. There shall not a hand touch it, but he shall surely be stoned or shot through. Whether it be beast or man, it shall not live. When the trumpet sounds long, all of a sudden you hear the trumpet. Oh, millennial context, here's a pattern. They shall come up to the mount. And Moses went down from the mount unto the people and sanctified the people, and they washed their clothes. And he said unto the people, be ready against the third day. Come not at your wives. And that, we don't need to get into that. So there was an instruction to sanctify or consecrate the people. The people were to do that. And the Lord, through Moses, gave them that instruction. It's time to clean yourself up, just like what happened.
Glenn?
Uh-huh.
So this is really interesting because yesterday, I think it was yesterday, well, there's a hymn that I just wanted to learn because I thought it sounded cool. It's called Rock of Ages.
Oh.
And Jason, so as we were listening to it, like I'm like, I don't even know. It just had the word rock, and we know that the foundation is based on rock. But anyways, Jason was telling me it's symbolic of like Moses.
Mm-hmm.
And some
That
of the
was yesterday?
That was yesterday. And so does that have, because it says rock of ages cleft for me, let me hide myself in thee. And so I guess Moses smote the rock. I didn't know this. Jason. So he smote the rock
2 different times.
And so in the song it goes on about blood and water coming out of Jesus's side. Well, let me see if I can get the full lyrics. Oh, it says, let the water and the blood from thy riven side which flowed be of sin the double cure, cleanse me from its guilt and power. So after it goes, anyways, but does this connect to that?
It so connects to it, and you'll see how it connects to it even more, because we're going to get into blood, we're going to get into flesh, we're going to get into fat, we're going to get into skin, and all of the symbolism that could, if you can get your right brains out, will split the scriptures wide open. Because when you really know, and remember we talked about you receive something, you work to understand it, then you comprehend it, then you can possess it. We'll get to the point of hopefully bridging past understanding and start comprehending it, seeing it in 360 view, seeing it in 4 dimensions, or 3 dimensions, I mean, possesses the 4th. But anyway, so yes, it does. And watch, put on your seatbelt. This is going to be fun for you. I hope. I get so excited. I asked Sam. Sam was here for the weekend, and I was like going, I don't know if I should even do this. I got really excited. Finally, the stick of this project got wrapped up. And so I have all these free brain cells, and I started really piecing things together. And so hopefully you'll be excited about this topic as I am. So yes, you're spot on. Watch this unfold. All right, so with it, here's this initiatory thing, because they need to get to the top of the mountain, right? It's always the same pattern. It's the same story told over and over and over with just different context. And so here's this people. It's kind of like us and Joseph Smith put together, and Brigham Young kind of put his slant on the whole thing. Well, wash their clothes. Let's clean them up. So the Lord tells them to wash their clothes. And of course, putting on freshly washed clothes is like sanctification. Because when we're sanctified, if we're going to be sanctified, it means that the Lord is going to come closer to us. And if we're not sanctified, I think we vibrate to the point where we just go and explode. I don't know, but this sanctification is necessary, because when the Lord will draw close to us, we literally have to be vibrating at the same frequency, so to speak. I don't know. Get your right brains out and how to relate to it. But we talk about quickening and all of this stuff. And anyway, sanctification needs to be there. Okay, so in order to get a part or a group of people trained, there has to have someone that will go first. And so this priest, and it's pretty cool because I have all these Hebrew names now, these Jewish names, these Hebrew names now. This priest, the Kohen, is someone who already stands near to God. And so that person that already has experience, or in other words, has keys because they've done it and they know how to get up to that place, they start explaining it, right? And these duties at the tabernacle that used to be or were intended for each family. Now said the Lord said after the golden calf, Levites only, guys. You're in timeout, and there's only going to be one guy that is going to be able to go into the Holy of Holies. You just need to watch and hope that after some cycle of creation that you'll eventually get to be one of those later that will be able to have the same opportunity, right? And so after the sin with the golden calf and the loss of access to the priesthood, to men, right down here, the Lord taught in Leviticus, and this is what we're going to get into, Leviticus 1 and 2. how to get back what was lost by following an ordinance by way of ceremonies and offerings. Okay. So I hope that was a good intro to context and just saying, here's the predicament that we're in, right? And make no mistake, guys, it's the predicament the LDS church is in right now, or any other church. There's two churches only. And all right, so just quick overview here. If you get into Leviticus 1 and 2 and start parsing it out, there are 5 different specific offerings. And you could go in, and I've gathered all of them. I didn't put it here, and it'd be too many slides. But there's the first, it's a burnt offering, and it's progressive. A grain offering, there's a peace offering. We're going to be focusing on the sin offering, which is also called by some people the purification offering. And then there's a trespass offering. And the thing that we need to remember is each offering is distinct and has their own rites. And remember, rites are kind of like ceremonies, or kind of like performances, or things that you do with your body. You have to perform. And so each of these, the burnt, grain, peace, sin, trespass, each had their own and their own subparts. We need to remember that. We're only going to get into the sin offering. Like 15 years ago, I really got into this because I had Brother Norman and the CES, and CES was actually pretty good because they just relied on the scripture because they didn't know any better. But I got into this a lot like 15 years ago, but there's a lot to it, and it gives you a good context of what's going on. So those are the offerings. We're going to be focusing on the sin offering and the purification offering tonight. All right. Okay. So what is it? What is a sin offering? It involves killing an animal at the altar. Now I'm going to give you something. I've already showed Sam and Jared on Sunday. This is my creation here, and we're going to get to that, but not till later. I map it all out later. So for us right-brained folks, where it's easier to see the whole thing, I have it mapped out. So it will come into hopefully a good focus, but please, patience. Yeah, go ahead.
Can you just give me, the why one more time? So, because the law of Moses was fulfilled, but it just points to Christ and the path to ascend. Is that what you're?
Yeah. Yeah, I think you joined just a little late. And here's, no, it's good. I'm glad that you brought it up. Here's the predicament. Like the LDS church right now, and like all of Israel before, because of them whoring after idols, it was that sin of the golden calf. Moses came down off the mount with a higher law intended for all of the nation of Israel. They blew it. God said, hey, you guys, there's only going to be one priestly, meaning administrative group. It's going to be very, very small. They're going to be called the Levites. And out of the Levites, you're only going to have one high priest. Meaning you guys are essentially damned for the rest of your life. You will not have the opportunity unless if you really press forward. You could break through it, by the way. Think about it. The law of Moses, did any people under the law of Moses break out of it and see the Lord? Yes, they were called the prophets, right? And so they broke out of it. And so to your point, Kirsten, the predicament, what we're talking about is how to reverse that effect and make it so the Martineau family, the Carlson family, the Walters, the Bowmans, and everyone will have the opportunity, just not one person. Meaning the fullness of the gospel, which, by the way, the Gentiles rejected again. And so that's the where we're going, is how the law of Moses taught us to reverse that effect and make it so a family, the image of God, man and woman, a priest, could break through that limitation of the law of Moses and ascend up to receive more, to actually walk through those two pillars of the temple and be one of those high priests that actually can go into the temple. Because remember, it's very, very limited who could enter between those two pillars. So I don't know if that makes sense, but it makes it, we're going to talk about exactly what we need to do with a little bit different symbolism, how our marriages can make it and get it, enter in through, be reborn, enter in through those legs, the pillars of the temple, and enter into the holy place and eventually the Holy of Holies. Does that make sense?
Yes, thanks.
Okay. And so what we talked about right here is these are the offerings right here, and they're all Leviticus 1 and 2. This is not boring reading, guys, too. If you start comprehending, this is good stuff. We're going to talk about the sin and purification offering only. We're going to leave the others, and we can talk about it and whenever, if anyone ever has a desire, but we're only going to talk about tonight the sin and purification offering. And so this sin offering involves the killing of an animal at this table, the slaughter table, but it is an altar of sacrifice. Jews call it the slaughter table. I get it, but I like using its altar because it is an altar of sacrifice. And then just so that you know too, and Jared and I were talking about this yesterday, herds in the law of Moses include cattle. It's cow and bovine creatures. Flocks, if it says flocks, it means sheep, goats, and fowls. And they're different orders of things. And depending upon the prosperity of the family, they're able to offer different things. And since they're different orders of animals, the process was a little bit different, but the effect was the same. So this is the sin offering, and it involved the killing of an animal at the altar. One thing in my study that I didn't know, at that table of slaughtering, or that altar, it was the Israelite man that killed the animal. And I always thought it was a priest, but reading it, it was the actual Israelite that did, which makes it even more like Abraham and making it real, because these were animals that you've raised and the kids start loving, and they represented a way to support your family. So they gave it up. Okay. And then after that, with this sin offering, here's the parts of the animal sacrifice in the dialogue, Leviticus 1 and 2, that the Lord turns our attention to. He says, Glenn, pay attention to blood, to flesh, to fat, and the smoke. And those are what he highlights as he starts talking about it. And so if you want to find out where this sin offering is, I put it here so you can look at it later. It's in Leviticus 1. Leviticus 1 is really the overview of all of the offerings. And then Leviticus 2 adds a little bit more depth. And so if you want to dive into it yourself, the sin offering, I put the references here, and you could go and check it out. So these are the aspects that we're going to focus on right now. Hold on, let me turn on the fan here. All right, so the first thing talk about here, we're going to go over blood. And I'm just going to go through it quick because this want to get good time and don't want to put anyone to sleep here. Blood. These are my observations. In certain sacrifice, and they're not all of them, for all of the offerings, so to speak, and think about, get your right brains out. The blood was taken inside the tabernacle, or I should say the temple. I say both because there was the moving tabernacle and then there was the fixed temple of Solomon. But think, blood is certain sacrifices, blood was actually taken inside. And it was sprinkled 7 times before the curtain. And I have all these Hebrew words, and I have this big spreadsheet with all these Hebrew words, so I thought I'll put it in the parakit of the Holy of Holies. So it was sprinkled 7 times. That's the blood from your animal on that slaughtering table that you killed. That blood was taken inside. And by the way, that animal represents you and me. And then the blood was rubbed on the horns of the golden altar of incense. We can't get all the powers. Horns always, or we can't, sorry, the we can't get into all of the definitions, but the horns always represent power. And there was this altar of incense. And we'll get into smell in just a bit. And then the blood was poured out at the base of the bronze burning. It's a sacrificial altar that was actually, that they actually burned things on. So you get that with blood. Those are some of the things that I pulled out from it. Now, in other offerings, the non-sin offerings, this wasn't all required. The blood was merely rubbed on the horns of the bronze sacrificial altar, and the remainder poured out on its base. But the sin offering was a little bit different. So I put the key question in regard to sin. Regarding sin and blood, what purpose did the blood serve? And we're going to start getting into some definitions now. And so we'll get into Leviticus 7:3. Only think about blood right now. That's all I ask you to think about right now is just blood. So let's read Leviticus 7:3. And we're thinking about blood. And here is, hold on. Jen does not know I'm doing this, so sorry. I'm going to have to put you on hold 2 seconds. Okay, and so Leviticus 7:3. And whatever man there be of the house of Israel, or the strangers that sojourn among you, that eats any manner of blood, I will even set my face against that soul, that eats blood, and will cut him off from among his people. Here we go. For the life of the flesh is in the blood. And I have given it to you upon the altar to make an atonement for your souls. These are all keywords. I didn't even highlight this one. For it is the blood that makes an atonement, and the Hebrews call it expiation, for the soul. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, no soul of you shall eat blood, neither shall any stranger that sojourns among you eat blood. And whatever man there be of the children of Israel, or the strangers that sojourn among you, who hunts and catches any beast of fowl that may be eaten, he shall even pour out the blood thereof and cover it with dust. And here's the definition again. For it is the life of all flesh. The blood of it is for the life thereof. Therefore I said unto the children of Israel, you shall eat or eat the blood of no manner of flesh, for the life of all flesh is the blood thereof. Whoever eats it shall be cut off, and every soul that eats that which died of itself, or that which was torn with beast, whether it be one of your own country or a stranger, he shall both wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and be unclean until sunset. Then shall he be clean, but if he wash them not, nor bathe in his flesh, then he shall bear his iniquity. Now, just a little aside, Mel Fish, and we talked to him quite a bit, him and Gwenna, Mel has passed on, they always said, we don't eat flesh, and unless if we know how the animal was actually killed. And he says, so that's almost impossible. Me and Melvin, we decided not to eat any meat at all. So there's that whole thing, if it's been torn, you don't know how they died. For some reason, there's an effect. And I believe, even though the belief doesn't have a lot of knowledge of what to do, that there's truth in that. So, as pertaining to blood,
as an aside, interestingly, this is among the scriptures that the Jehovah's Witnesses use to not have blood transfusions.
Oh,
because blood is the life, and you're taking the life of someone else. Interesting.
Wow, that is. And it gives you pause to think, or to consider it a little bit more deeply. Except for that Christ hasn't stated anything yet, but there is something to it. We'll get into that whole thing. So, with God, there is an equivalency. When we think of, because he gave it clearly in scriptures, and scriptures that now have been accepted by Christ, which to me is very significant. Before with the King James Version, I was like, I don't know. I'm not quite sure, but it's different now. So blood equals life. And I went, and I've been studying blood for probably 4 months now. Got stuck on a few things, waited, and then all of a sudden this came up, added a little bit more. Across the board, blood does equal life. It really does. And then the Hebrew word I put in for life is nepes. And a few Bible and commentators render blood or life as soul.
I have a quick comment.
Mm-hmm.
In my exercise program, the girl will say, like, you feel your heart beating? That's you alive.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I hear that above me almost every day. And blood is life. It means you are alive. And so then with it, of course, too, and I wanted to throw in the how we know that Christ revealed to Joseph Smith in the TNC what the word soul means, right? And it's here, TNC 86.2. Now, we're talking about the soul, right? Now, verily, I say to you that that through the redemption which is made for you is brought to pass the resurrection from the dead, and the spirit and the body is the soul of man. And the resurrection for the dead is the redemption of the soul. All of this is talking about is so interesting contextually. It's exactly what we're talking about tonight in Leviticus. And the redemption of the soul, and they call it the expiation or the atonement or the ascension. The redemption of the soul is through him who quickens all things. We're going to be talking about how fat is quickened upon an altar. And I don't want to give it all away right now. Through him who quickens all things, and whose bosoms it is decreed that the poor and meek of the earth shall inherit it. Therefore, it must needs be sanctified. Remember that word? That's what Moses said. Hey, go and sanctify, clean these people up. Therefore, it must needs be sanctified from all unrighteousness, that it may be prepared for the celestial glory. Go to the top of Mount Sinai. For after it has filled the measure of creation, it shall be crowned with glory, even the presence of God the Father, that bodies who are of the celestial kingdom may possess it forever and ever. For this intent was it made and created, and for this intent are they sanctified. It's so crazy, guys. I go through and pull these keywords, and it's exactly the same context. It's amazing. So, in summary, or I should say, let's talk about the key here. Like I say, I didn't have a lot of time to put together these slides, but a key element that can be uncovered, at least through my pondering, is this blood is also functions as a separator. Blood makes it possible to separate or detach sin from man's spirit, which they call here soul, and it is both, and we'll talk about that, and make him or her purified. Blood does that. Until blood is spilled, there is no separation of sins from a man's spirit, soul. And we're going to get into the symbolism, guys, and it is really cool. So we went over this quick. I've been pondering this one a long time, so I'm just throwing it at you and just like, hey, grab onto that. It's worthy of deep consideration of what blood is. And I put some together, the key elements too, if you could lodge it away in your mind. So when you hear the word or have the sacrament again, you could start considering certain things that would have been, you might have understood it, but you couldn't comprehend it, so to speak. It wasn't three-dimensional yet. Okay, so we talked about blood, and we went quick, guys. But we're now going to move to flesh and skin. And so with flesh and skin, let's read Leviticus 1:12, because remember, we're going to here, and we're going over these things, and we're talking about, where's my word summary? We're talking about these aspects. We just talked about blood, and we're going to get into flesh right now, right? And so with it, let's read Leviticus 1:12. Okay. And he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for a sin offering. Bullock is a herd, part of a herd. It's cows. And he shall do with the bullock as he did with the bullock for a sin offering. So shall he do with this, and the priest shall make an atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. And he shall carry forth the bullock outside the camp. And think about that. Get your right brains out. We're in the inner courtyard where all the priests are. Israel was on the outside. And they took it outside the camp and burned. It says, and burn him as he burned the first bullock. And it is a sin offering for the congregation. So the flesh and skin is a lot different than the blood. And we're going to get into fat too. So the flesh and skin of the animal symbolizes sin. Our flesh, it's the effects of being covered with flesh. But remember, flesh and skin of the animal, it symbolizes sin, but only in the sin offering. So you got to be careful because they're each compartmentalized and each have their own order to go to fullness. And then the other offering, you receive it and then you have to go to fullness and then you can move up to the next, right? So in the sin offering, flesh and the Hebrews call it hide, but it's skin. Flesh and skin of the animal, they represent skin. And I just need to follow my notes here because I already stated it. In other offerings, flesh and skin may not represent sin. Okay, and so in Leviticus, we just read it, and we didn't go into 11, but the flesh and skin of the animal were burned outside the camp. It was not burned on top of the altar. And we'll show how the altar, I don't know if I put in the graphic with the altar. I made that representation, but anyway, there's this bronze altar that was a burning altar that burned things, right? You weren't to put the skin or the flesh on top of that altar. Its removal, meaning the flesh and the skin or the hide, signified the removal of sin from the camp of Israel. If you think about what's happening in the fellowships, guys, what is the sacrament doing? It's taking sin, we're placing it upon an altar and petitioning Father, Amen, O God, the eternal Father, right? To remove it and take it from us and lift it from us. It's the same process that's happening. This is talking about the removal of sin from the camp of Israel. They take it outside of the boundaries or the covering or the sacred space and getting it out so that we could become more and more pure. And so I put note, each offering is distinct with its own specific ascension symbolism. I think we talked about that up here. I said, for example, in certain offerings, the officiating priest could eat the flesh of sin offering and bear the guilt of the congregation. But that was just some, not the sin offering. In order to do that, the sin offering, it had to be taken to the Lord. He says, and that's Leviticus 2:29, he says, and by doing so with the role of his office, and that priestly office where they could eat the flesh, it represents the separation of sin. And I said this relates to a different aspect of atonement that is discussed in Leviticus 2. And I'll go over that whole path. And it's a path that we're actually familiar with. We just need to orient ourselves with it in the law of Moses. It's the same path. It really is. And it does relate to the atonement, or getting, in other words, known as being born again, entering into the holy place, right? So that's flesh and skin. I think that's all I had on flesh and skin. So remember, flesh and skin represents sin, and get it out of here, guys. Get it out of your sacred space. You don't want it. And it's all symbolic because we actually need flesh and skin for a covering, but symbolically, eventually we need to discard it, which we all will. What did Denver say in Boise? We're just a motorcycle wreck or some bout with some nasty infectious disease before, we leave our fleshy tabernacle. All right, so next, fat and smoke. It's the next aspect, and I put them together. I co-joined them. This is what's significant, and this is what pertains to ascension, and this is what we need to pay attention to, because this is symbolically speaking what we're supposed to be doing. And there's deep symbolism here, and I hope your right brains will be accessed with these things. So in contrast to the flesh and skin of the animal, the fat of the animal, I don't have all my highlights, was placed on top of the altar. This is the fat. The blood wasn't. They did something specific with the blood, but the fat of the animal was placed on top of the altar. And that's found, I put all of the references, so if you ever dig into it and want to figure out some symbolism, you could actually go to the source. A lot of them I actually put in blue and highlighted. So the fat was not taken outside the camp because fat symbolizes the soul of the offerer. So speaking, fat, if you want to figure out an equivalency, when God is talking about fat, he's talking about the soul. They didn't really have the definition in the King Jamesian or the Tanakh or the Pentateuch, or the Torah. They didn't really have that definition. We do have the definition, but it really, the fat is really mentioning the soul, which is the body and the spirit. And so with this fat, that, by the way, needs to be separated with a knife, in thinking about the slides, I did not include the knife aspect. So I'm going to have to go back in my notes and put it. The fat had to be divided from the flesh, or not the, yeah, from the flesh, the meat and the skin. And it required a knife, a division, something that would divide, which is very, very symbolic. And so I asked the question, what is the purpose of the burning? And that's the translation there. If there's a better translation that I found out about talking with certain people that I trust. What's the purpose of the burning of the fat on the altar there in Leviticus? What is it? And the translation, it should not be burned on top of the altar. It was not incineration. It was a burning or a warming so that the fat could be transformed. And I says, and you mentioned this, Jared, yesterday when we were talking, as I said, or Jared Walter on Sunday mentioned quickening. So you place that fat upon the burning altar. And what happened, this fat, which is the soul, was transformed. It was quickened. It was changed into smoke. And so the fat's transformation into a rising cloud of smoke symbolizes a spirit separated from sin, and that spirit ascending to God's sacred space above. Think of the covenant. At any time, I have sacred space above. That smoke would go up into the upper realms and be presented to God for his acceptance. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So that's fat and smoke. Oh, I have quite a bit more on this. Let's see what I have so I can orient myself. Oh, I have quite a bit on fat and smoke. And so with it, let's see, where was I? So this whole thing of quickening the fat, which is our soul, and if you go back into the two sacrament prayers, and there are two sacraments, and listen to the wording, the one sacrament the priests provide, the second sacrament, the emblems God provides. This is all in 3rd Nephi, right? In both, the word soul is there. So this transformation of the fat, quickening it with fire, going through a process to get it to the point where blood will be removed and put down a drain. Well, I wonder if I even put that in. I'll have to, I think I missed the blood portion in the drain. Well, I think we'll get to it. The blood was removed from the flesh. It was removed or separated from the fat. The blood went into the earth. The fat went on top of the burning altar. It was transformed. The soul represents, the fat represents the soul. It was quickened and it went up. And we'll talk about an aroma here in a second. So I was saying this is a big key to understand the core purpose of the bronze altar. It's the burning altar, and how it transforms a mere man into a priest, which is the whole, remember we read this whole thing, and you shall be unto me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. It's about transforming them into a priest. Oh, I had double here. Let's see if they're exactly the same. Sorry. There we go. And so with it, fat and smoke are really important, symbolic right brain aspect to say, oh, I actually need to become quickened. Oh, what was that process in the law of Moses? What was going on symbolically to get my spirit quickened so it could get and ascend up? And so, and here's the notes, so the considerations that I pulled too. In Deuteronomy and in the sin offering, the fat is of equal value as the blood. And it says, oh, I put the reference in here, Leviticus 3:16, all the fat is the Lord's, is what it states. The eating of fat, like the blood, is strictly banned. If you get into it, they said, you do not eat blood. We already read some of those verses, and you do not eat the fat in this offering, right? And then it says, anyone doing so was to be cut off from the community of Israel. And because what? It was the food of the Lord. And I have at the very, towards the end here, in a few minutes, we'll get to it, but what God considers to be his food. And by the way, Jen's always asking about this, the kidneys. I think Sam was talking about it too, the innards, the kidneys, the liver. In this offering, the kidneys and liver counted as fat, and you're not supposed to eat that stuff, and they're supposed to be treated. In fact, they were in some of them, the kidneys, the innards were taken and washed, which is really interesting. Think about the washing and anointing, thinking about what it's doing to the different parts of the body. All of the inner guts, so to speak, were washed. Think about that for a minute. And so I said, remember, different rules apply to different offerings, as in the whole burnt offering or dedication offering where the flesh and fat were burned together on the altar. Just remember, if you get into it, and I've stated it 3 times now, but the offerings are different. The sin offering is very, very significant. It's the one that allows us to start ascending. And remember, this is the symbolism that we're talking about right now. And so in wrapping up the whole thing with fat and smoke, I had the key considerations there. Let's go into the aspect of fat and smoke and pertaining to smell. In weeks past, on one of the Monday classes too, we went over the Egyptians, and there's 5 core key senses that we focus on. One is smell. And here we go with fat and smoke. And here we start understanding. I used 3 different books to be able to get to the aspect of when the fat was burned. Does it smell good, or does it smell foul? And so let's read a few scriptures and then discuss them. So Ezekiel 9:9, as for you, O house of Israel, thus saith the Lord God, go serve everyone his idols, and hereafter also, if you will not listen unto me, but pollute my holy name no more with your gifts and with your idols. For in my holy mountain, in the mountain of the height of Israel, says the Lord God, there shall all the house of Israel, all of them in the land, serve me. There will I accept them, and there will I require your offerings and the first fruits of your offerings. Here's the offering words, right, that ties it into it. With all your holy things. I will accept you with your sweet savor. Think about the fat turning to smoke. And if you have been in a steakhouse with a ribeye, which is very fatty cut of meat, it smells really good. And he says, I will accept you with your sweet savor when I bring you out from the people and gather you out of the countries wherein you have been scattered. And I will be sanctified in you before the heathen. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I shall bring you into the land of Israel, into the country for which I lifted up my hand to give it to your fathers. And there shall you remember your ways and all your doings, wherein you have been defiled. And you shall loathe yourselves in your own sight for all of your evils that you have committed. And you shall know that I am the Lord when I have worked with you for my name's sake. Not according to your wicked ways, nor according to your corrupt doings, O you house of Israel, says the Lord God. So the only thing I wanted to focus on really in this is the offerings there and the sweet savor. How does the sweet savor come? it's made possible through heating up fat. There's a transformation and there's a sweet savor. So this rising smoke cloud signifies the ascending spirit. And of course, it's symbolic, as I mentioned, represented his soul or her soul being accepted by heaven. And that example in Ezekiel, and by the way, the context of Ezekiel, they were moved out of their place, right? He said, I will bring you back, because that was Ezekiel's call, is trying to get them back and calling Israel the idolaters, the golden calf type focused people. I'll bring them back. And as soon as I smell your offerings and they're sweet, I'll accept you back. Now listen to Philippians 1:17. This is the New Testament. Now you Philippians know also that in the beginning of the gospel, when I departed from Macedonia, no church shared with me as concerning giving and receiving, but you only. For even in Thessalonica, you sent once and again unto my necessity, not because I desire a gift, but I desire fruit that may abound in your account. But I have all and abound. I am full, having received Epaphroditus, the things which were sent from you. Here's the key word: an odor of a sweet smell, a sacrifice acceptable, well-pleasing to God. But my God shall supply all your need according to his riches in glory by Jesus Christ. Now unto God and your fathers be glory forever and amen. So it talks about continually, this is a topic that's there. It's a sweet smell, and it's related directly to what's going on with fat upon the bronze altar, burning altar. And for the sake of, oh yeah, go ahead.
So, okay, so if there's like a blood offering, then until you start sacrificing what God wants you to sacrifice, then that's when you start ascending.
Yes, and we'll get into what that sacrifice is. You're spot on.
So that is one of the biggest things for me personally when I was in awakening, was this pattern. I mean, and it's like, I knew it in the most simplistic way, but the whole Moses climbing the mount and the children of Israel with their idols.
Mm-hmm.
And so the thing always in my mind is like, well, like if we are the children of Israel and we have idols, what's my idol? And trying to crush my idol, whatever that was.
That is spot on. Square in the middle of a pattern. It means that thought process, you are in the straight and narrow way. You're in the way. You're in that path. It's the rod of, you are on the pathway of ascent. That's exactly according to the pattern. And we'll get into a symbolic word that shows it.
Cool.
As we go.
But this, going in this depth, I'm trying to stay with you. It's so good. I'm gonna have to go back and read it all again. But
yeah, this pattern is worthy of consideration. And we're actually all pretty familiar in the Restoration Gospel. We're actually pretty familiar with the path, but this context has aspects that are hidden to most of the world that really get us beyond understanding. And I'm going through the effort here and wanted to share it too, because this gets us beyond understanding and starts us bridging into comprehension. In weeks past, of course, we went over receive, understand, comprehend, possess. I did it on purpose because it's a pathway. Why I want to get into this, and like Kirsten is even recognizing the patterns here, this will start allowing us to comprehend, just more than understand. Start seeing it three-dimensionally. Really cool stuff.
So you said the Levite guy would offer the sacrifice. So does that mean at that point he becomes the priest, or like in a sense the animal, because that represents us becomes
I'm going
to
go over it in detail right here. This is my little graphic.
All right, sorry, I'll be quiet.
No, it's good. But you're right on exactly, and I map it out as best that I could with this graphic, even though I guess it's all right. It was fun to do. Jared was watching me, or I presented it to Jared and Sam yesterday. Okay, so with it, Genesis, it also talks about, we're talking about an offering and the sweet smell. I wanted to just throw in Genesis 3:8 with Cain. And it says, well, if you do well, if you follow the path, you should be accepted too, Cain. But he didn't want to do it, right? And so for the sake of time, we won't get into it. We're very familiar with that. But it's the same type of offering. When he presented, it was not savory. It didn't have a sweet smell. It didn't point to the right place, right? God gave instructions, and Cain innovated because of the temptations of Satan, and went down the other path. But I just wanted to throw in the Genesis 3:8 with Cain and Abel to show, well, he went, it's like him going to that altar of sacrifice there and says, hey, for the sin offering, you got to do an animal here. And here's the animals that you could use. And he says, nah, I just want to use carrots. And then he got mad. You don't like my carrots? You know, we have to do it the way God is asked if we expect to receive the promise. And we've talked about that so many times. So that's what that is. So in Philippians, it says, notice that God's smelling, and this is the point that I wanted to make. I didn't have time to highlight everything here, but smelling, and get this in your mind, smelling is always judgment with God. He sees our offering, our quickening that comes because of sacrifice. He smells it and he judges. Does it smell good? Or is there a stench to it? And so smelling is a big aspect. And God's smelling, or the judgment of their smoke aroma of this fat, signifies his acceptance of them, or the people, as Israel were doing it. And like I said in Philippians, sweet aromas are mentioned in multiple places. I just use Philippians. I mean, you can do the keyword search and you'll see there's a lot. I just threw one in because I had to do it quick. And then I mentioned too, with the Genesis, the rejection of an offering aroma is equivalent to rejection of the offer himself. An example of the Lord's acceptance and a rejection of Abel's and Cain's offerings are in Genesis 3:8. And so our offerings need to be acceptable. They need to smell good. They need to smell good. And so here are the key considerations that I brought up, or that I found. A key that can be uncovered by pondering, why do I put that in? It is that the blood also functions as a separator. I already mentioned that before. I kind of did a spoiler. The blood is a separator. The blood makes it possible to separate or detach sin from our soul. And I think I put it in, I took it from earlier. I mentioned, until blood is spilled, there's no separation of sin from man's spirit or soul. And remember when the covenant was offered? The covenant administrator or officiator, there's actually blood on his hands. And so it's that aspect of blood and fat and smoke.
So I don't get that one. Can you just go back really quick? So can you just clarify this one really quick?
Yeah. And so what I'll do, and to your point too, we need to talk a little bit more, because to your point, Kirsten, too, I left out in putting these notes together the aspect of the knife. There was the knife of the Israelite that would actually slit the throat of the animal. The blood would leave their body, go down, and they would actually collect the blood. I'll go over it and review it because, I missed out that element.
So are you kind of referring to that, because that's what was taken out in the LDS temple ceremony, was the cutting covenant?
Yeah, it's directly related to that, and how it becomes lopsided. It means that aspect you don't understand. You can understand the language of God or the correct definitions of God. And we'll get into it. To your point, I'll review, because I need to put in those slides that go over that aspect.
Oh, I think I'm getting it. Okay, I'm good. Sorry.
The blood will separate the flesh from the soul. It's the blood and the fat that allows it. A knife has to come in, make it so that there's blood, so that the fat or the soul could be separated from the flesh, which is our body, so that it could go up into that abode above, that sacred space above, as a sweet aroma. And we'll get into that. But to your point, you're you're spot on too. Is I need to get that when I put these slides together too, is put more, it's the cutting covenant. And I think that's the reason why I didn't put it in, because the cutting covenant would have been another 30 minutes. And that whole aspect of how the knife divides the flesh from the fat from the skin. And so, yeah, I'll try to go over it when we get to this one. And it's only a few more slides. Okay, so until blood is spilled, there's no separation from a man's spirit, or sins from a man's spirit. Blood is required, period, in order to ascend. We need to know what blood represents. We need to know what it means, and we'll get into it. So I put in summary, and then we'll get into this really quick. So after the smoke rises, you put the fat on the burning altar, and the Israelite offerer is accepted by heaven. Heaven smells it. It's a sweet aroma. All of a sudden, he reappears as a priest dressed in white. And we'll get into this in detail in just a second. After that point, if they offered, it was accepted, they pop into the priestly courtyard, because they belong there now. And then they start administrating. They start using the priesthood in their own ministry to start helping others. And there's this process that we'll get into. So the Levite priest is now a substitute for the offer. If their offer was accepted by heaven, then they will become a Levite priest, so to speak. But the Israelites under the law of Moses were still damned. They were stuck. It was only symbolic. They couldn't get beyond it. If they were not Levite, they couldn't get to the inner courtyard. They just couldn't get there. They had to be a Levite priest. So all of Israel was literally condemned to hell, which is the celestial kingdom. They were stuck. And until those people really press forward, like Nephi was mentioning in 2 Nephi 31:20, wherever it is now, you must press forward. Only few ever would be willing to really deconstruct the law of Moses, become a prophet like the prophets in the Old Testament, and actually become or act as a high priest. Very, very few got it. They were allowed, and they did break through, but in general, the whole house of Israel, they were damned. Literally, they were stuck. And so the Levites' white clothing that are on the inside, their white clothing represents its purification. They got to the point of purifying themselves, and because they learned how to purify themselves, they then could administrate the same to others because they had keys. They've done it themselves. They could share it because they've done it themselves. And it says, then through this Levite priest proxy, if that's the best way to put it, we use the term proxy all the time in IT. So proxy, we use it in the temple. The Israelite offer appears in the priest court where only Levites are allowed. And then it reverses the whole effect of, as promised in the beginning, but was taken away because of the golden calf incident, then they could all become a kingdom of priests, right? The effect, they reverse the effect of the golden calf incident and their consignment to the celestial sphere. All of a sudden, it makes it so one could break out of the telestial, so to speak, and ascend to the next level. And this is where I want to go and get into this. So if you can just get your right brains out, I will see if I could walk through this. And I took some graphics from the internet and Hyde and everything, and I'll walk through each of it. But for us right-brained people, I'm becoming more and more right-brained. Hopefully this will start making sense. And so I'll walk you through. And down here, let's see, I numbered them. I didn't have enough time, but if I were to do it right, I would number this as we go, and maybe later I will. But let me walk you through what we need to do in a couple, in a marriage, in the image of God, to be this guy right here on the other side, outside of the court of priests, because there is a dividing line, to become like this offerer that is going to the altar of sacrifice, bringing a bullock or whatever animal they could afford. And there were certain, depending, it went all the way from a cow to a lamb to a goat to a fowl, depending upon what you could afford, so to speak. So this is where we are, and I'll walk you through it. The offerer Israel went to this table of sacrifice. They chose an acceptable offering without blemish. They couldn't be sick. We all know this. And it was the best of the best. And they laid it upon this table of sacrifice. And the offerer killed the animal. The blood flowed out from the flesh of the animal. It was collected. And with that collection, it was used to be poured into Mother Earth at the base of the sacrificial altar. Then with a knife, the hide would be all removed, the skin, think of a covering from the animal, and think of the covering that has to be removed. And in the TNC, suddenly the covering of my temple will be removed. There's keys in there. The hide was removed, the skin was removed. The flesh was divided from the fat. The flesh and the hide were taken outside of, see the boundary here? This is really limited, but it was taken outside of the boundaries, outside of the camp, and it was burned. And it says, and outside the camp, the flesh and skin of the animal were burned outside the camp, according to Leviticus 1, 11 through 12. And these were not burned on top of the altar. It doesn't really say much about the smell of outside, but if you ever smelt burning hair or bones, they don't smell good. Meat might smell a little bit better because it has a little bit of fat in it, but if you ever burn a filet mignon, it doesn't smell very good. So they had a foul aroma, and it all represents sin. So that was divided from the animal. And so the fat then was taken and put upon this burning sacrificial altar that had heat in it. And the blood was poured down a drain, so it would go outside or into Mother Earth to be judged. The fat was placed to be quickened upon the altar, so it would ascend as smoke, hopefully as a sweet aroma. And the blood, as I mentioned here, functioned as a separator too, to make it so life was gone. And remember what blood is? It equals life. It's the hours in our day. It's the seconds in our life. Are we willing to give up blood? Or those seconds ticking, those minutes and those hours and those weeks and those months? Are we willing to give that up, that life? It represents us being willing, this offer, Israel, to shed our blood, which is our life, and give it to the Lord. And give it and let it go unto the earth. And then the fat was put, it was quickened. Soon as that happened.
Oh my gosh, guess what?
What's that?
This week Liv asked Jason how he's been reading this farm book about stuff. And she said, "How's your book?" He's like, "Oh, I had to learn some hard truths this week." And he read all about the butchering of a cow.
Wow. This has been happening a lot. Isn't that peculiar? That is so interesting. And it's exactly what we're talking about, the butchering of a cow. And what to do with it once it's been butchered, right? So here's the transformation, and here's what happens. Soon as this offerer, the Israelite, representing the image of God, went to this table of sacrifice, this altar of sacrifice, went through and followed the process. It was administered by somebody who knew, because they've done it themselves. They've been taught themselves. I put a little glow on these guys too. See, I could put glows on them and stuff. It's pretty fun. So I glowed him so he was represented a Levite. Soon as he did this whole thing and offered an acceptable offering, all of a sudden, he, in this day and age, because the fullness has been made available through the atonement of Jesus Christ, the atonement of Jesus Christ made it possible that this dude, representing the couple, could become and enter into the inner courtyard, which is the courts of priests, and become a priest themselves to give their life in teaching truth about this pathway of ascent. But they first had to give an acceptable offering.
Okay, so this is really making sense with Adam and Eve, because then that's the path. This is what they did with the first animal, right? To get the skin, coats of skins. And then that's because they were commanded in sacrifice.
Yes, and then if you get it too, because remember, the skin, they actually used the skin for Adam and Eve, which is a different offering. This one was burned, and there's others. Oh, it's made to be a covering. And think about when you first get into the temple, like you're referring to, we actually need to have a covering. Eventually, that covering, by the way, needs to be sacrificed so that we could ascend, go up into the sacred space above, and then we have to come back into it. It's all symbolic and representative of this ascension path. But we need to have an offering. Hold on. Oh, Jared, thank you, Jared. I just got some that he sent over some graphics that I could use in the sacrificial altar that's better than a square. We were talking about it yesterday too. Thank you, Jared. He just sent it through email. And so I hope this is making sense. We need to get in here, which is the next level of ascension up. And it represents the image of God, male and female. We need to get to this point, reverse the effects of what happened with the golden calf incident. Through the atonement of Jesus Christ, we now have access into these inner courtyards. This isn't even the temple yet. We're just getting into the point where we could actually go into the temple now. That's all we're talking about right now. There's more, because we actually need to get through the two pillars and actually enter into the holy place and eventually the Holy of Holies, right? So I hope that makes sense. We have to give our life, which is represented by blood. That offering has to be accepted by God. It's not our own innovative way of doing things. It's not creating our own instructions. It's not altering ordinances. It's doing exactly the way God has asked us to do it. And guess what? If we do it how God asks us, there's a sweet aroma. If we don't, there's a stench. Ezekiel talks about it. That's why I used the Ezekiel reference earlier. Ezekiel talked about, and Ezekiel was really, really hard on him. That's not it. That's the food of God. But Ezekiel was really hard and says, your offerings, they stink. They completely stink. Why? You're changing everything. That's not what I asked you to do. So you think if you're going to change the things and to have it be a sweet aroma to me, it's not going to be accepted. You're not going to get to this inner courtyard, the next level of ascension, if you don't follow the instructions. And so I mentioned at the very end, the transformation from the Israelite to the Levite priest shows that with his soul's ascension and heaven's acceptance is that correct? Like I said, I didn't have time to edit it. Has become a priest cloaked in righteousness. So you see this process in order to reverse the effect. And to think about it, hey guys, right now, are we offering our blood, meaning our life, to teach the truth to our children? To teach each other, and especially with this new covenant? Are we giving our life to do it, which is represented by blood? When you're putting your body on the altar and offering this blood, are you allowing this division of sin to happen? Because that's what happens. It's this separator. Are you allowing it to separate blood and flesh, to separate from your soul, so that you can go to the sacred space above as promised in the covenant? Because what does it say in the covenant? Well, at any time I could have you go up there. Eventually it's going to be the temple in Zion that you're going to enter. But anytime I have sacred space above, that if you have sweet aroma and you actually get to the point of the sacrificial altar and get this quickening effect of your soul, oh yeah, I could accept you. Hopefully our offering will be sweet. And then what I did with this glowing guy up
So
here
is
too,
that, would that be the second comforter?
this is the rebirth, because we're not into the temple yet. We're not even into the holy place yet. This is where we get to the point where there's another aspect. If you asked such good questions, and it would have, but you're making it so that we'll get into a different aspect. We have multiple cycles of creation. We've been through this multiple times. If we've come down and we're born into this existence and have the opportunity to become a priest or offer these ordinances to somebody else, we actually have received certain things and are at a different level of ascension, being born into this world so that we could become a teacher to others. And every one of us in this covenant, read the covenant carefully, we're supposed to become teachers. It's a really good sign. And so once we become a teacher and are born again, sometimes on another cycle of creation, sometimes born again because we're picking up where we left off in a prior life, then we could press forward and go to the temple, enter in through the two pillars, enter into the holy place, and partake of what's offered in the holy place, which is wine and bread. When you get in the holy place, that's their jugs of wine, and there's unleavened bread in there, and the menorah. And then we could start going through. But this is only one aspect of this sacrifice. But my thing and the whole point of bringing this up is asking the question, our life, are we giving it? The 10th parable is directly related to the sweet aroma that got the attention of the angels. They saw, in that instance, the man's life or blood being given. He was administering relief. He obviously had a great relationship with his spouse. He's a family-focused guy and focused on administering relief. He was giving his life. It got the attention or had a sweet aroma, and all of a sudden heaven started noticing because he didn't stink. He smelled good. And then all of the preparations, go and read 10 again. He's now prepared. And all of the preparations are going to be made to facilitate the next parts of his ascension or her ascension.
And then that's the second comforter.
Yeah, and then as soon as we get into the holy place and partake of, it's the second sacrament, which is in 3rd Nephi. Enter into the holy place, partake of the wine and the unleavened bread that God provides, because God provides it in the holy place. Then we're prepared because we've supped with the Lord, or he's taken us up his abode with us. And then we can go and ascend further up into the Holy of Holies, which is more of a composite of Father and Mother Amen, because Christ needs to then introduce us to the Father, right? So we're only talking about this aspect of getting the attention of angels because our sweet aroma is ascending up, and it enables us to keep going on. But this whole thing with this Israelite, they have to follow the instructions. And remember, you really have to get your right brain out because, and to your point, Kirsten, you can be very right brain too, but I see this exact pattern in Israel leaving Egypt. It's the exact separation pattern. It has the same elements, but you have to get out your right brain and think, oh, it's the same pattern, different context. And I'm doing it on purpose too, so that we'll be able to see, okay, this is the context of an animal. And then Egypt leaving a sinful place instead of the flesh and skin, it is Egypt that represented sin. They had to divide themselves from it. And remember, the light and darkness were divided. All of the elements are there, but you have to get out your right brain, and it's very, very delightful. Okay, so for the sake of time, that is that aspect, and we could talk about it more, but that is the pathway that we need to do. Are we giving our life, our blood, to God? And is it acceptable? Meaning, are we following the instructions, not changing the ordinances? Are we following his path? Well, if we are, we can ascend. So the last thing I wanted to do, and there's only a few slides left, I wanted to go over the food of God. And I found some other cool things too when I was going over this bread and fat and the blood, and I was able to pull some other stuff too. And so I only want to talk about one more thing, and that is well, actually, I'm looking at it right now. It's actually two more things. I want to talk about the food of God and what is it? And then that last part, the ruach, or the pleasing aroma, and how it's actually experienced. So let's do this and then we'll conclude. So what is the food of God? We've been talking about this blood and the fat. What's acceptable to God, we talked about, is the fat. But let's get into Ezekiel when he was trying to get Israel back on track. And he stated this in verse 36, pertaining to the question, what is
so
God?
In Testimony of St. John, he says that the spiritual food is light and truth.
Yep.
So yeah, so when I ask my kids that, I'm like, so how do we receive light and truth? So it's through the rock, right? It's through keeping the commandments, and that's the spiritual food, right? Because in Chronicles of Narnia, we're in Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, and Edmund, becomes a slave to his belly because, like the Turkish delight whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it was really interesting, the timing of reading Testimony of St. John with the kids and that, because it was good to kind of understand, like it's a reminder when we're hungry, like that we also need to be our souls are hungry too. It's like anyways.
Yeah, and our souls, our body, and our spirit need to be hungry, and there is something that we should be feasting upon, which are the words of Christ. And that's what we're supposed to be feasted upon, which is light and truth. And we'll get into that aspect, but with the symbolism and context of the sin offering. So watch this one. So what's the food of God? Let's read Ezekiel 21:36. Then he brought me the way of the north gate before the house, and I looked, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord, and I fell upon my face, and the Lord said unto me, Son of man, mark well, and behold with your eyes, and hear with your ears all that I say unto you concerning all of the ordinances of the house of the Lord, and the laws thereof. And mark well the entering of the house with every exit of the sanctuary. And you shall say to the rebellious, even to the house of Israel, thus says the Lord God, O you house of Israel, let it suffice you of all your abominations, in that you have brought into my sanctuary strangers, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary and to pollute it. Even my house, when you offer my bread, the fat and the blood. And they have broken my covenant because of all of your abominations. And you have not kept the charge of my holy things, but you have set keepers of my charge in my sanctuary for yourselves. Thus saith the Lord God, no stranger, uncircumcised in heart, nor uncircumcised in flesh, The first preparatory, by the way, of flesh is circumcision of flesh, which is the male organ. It's the preparatory, which represents the fullness, which is the heart, right? It's throughout all of the Old Testament. It says, no stranger uncircumcised of heart nor uncircumcised of flesh shall enter into my sanctuary of any stranger that is among the children of Israel. So here the Lord is in rebuke of all of rebellious Israel for offering him food in an unacceptable manner. So the stuff that they were bringing was not good. And let's see here. I won't worry about formatting as we go. So let's go over the equivalencies here. Bread, and I didn't have a lot of time to pull this together, but think about the sacrament and go and check this for yourself. Bread is equal to the fat and blood. Blood, we have another emblem too, which adds a lot to the sacrament. And so bread in this context is fat and blood. Bread is his food. And so if we look into verse 36, and I didn't put it in because I ran out of time at the very end. At verse 36, the fat and the blood, and only the priest, and they're called this, the Zadok priest, may offer me the fat and blood, says the Lord God. He was totally slamming on the priests. They were just jokes. They were not following instructions. We live in that day and age, by the way, right now. We're experiencing that right now, where the priests are offering the incorrect food of God. The fat and the blood, it was not an acceptable offering. It was a counterfeit. So I said, there's the definition, and it's really exciting. God's food is blood and fat. And I say, should we accept this literally? Yeah. If you understand what the symbols are. Oh, go ahead.
So I thought like the blood was the wine though.
It is.
But you're saying the bread is fat and blood.
And so you're asking all the right questions, but at first it's a composite, it's preparatory. When you enter into the holy place, blood is available. Because you go into the holy place, there's the unleavened bread in those big loaves, and there's big stacks of them. And then there's jugs of wine underneath. The effects of the wine are very, very significant.
Oh,
First we get to the point where his food is, it's the bread, and we're going through, and if you get, let me take you back here, and I love your questions because you're seeing it. Here's the offerings. And so there's this preparatory thing where there's a grain offering, a peace offering, and then your offerings start becoming better and better and more acceptable. God is a master teacher, and he says, hey, start with this. This is kindergarten. I'm going to have you get into, whatever it is up to 6th grade. And then I'm going to get you into middle school. And then I'm going to have you go into high school. And then you're going to go into college.
So are you going to go through the other offerings?
I'd love to. It just takes time. And we were, of course, talking about the lectures on faith before. So, yeah. So it's this preparatory thing that they become more and more acceptable. And it's not that it's as clean as I just made it, because there are subcategories of the whole thing. Oh, but the symbolism is deep. And so to your point, we get to the point where we as a couple are now ready to go in and enter into the holy place and eat of that meal, so to speak. And wine is there. And the blood is there, because all of a sudden the blood of the atonement, which is of the mediator, the Messiah, the anointed one, is provided. And when we enter into that place, we're actually, I don't want to give it all away. It's so much going on.
So it's like the thing in the covenant where it talks about a sacrament is a marriage. Adam and Eve. I just know keywords.
Yeah, there's that sacrament. And see, to get to this point where you're glowing like this is a man and a woman. Hey, I love my wife. I love my husband. Let's do things together. Hey, where's your hand? Let's grab it. Hey, squeeze your hands together. Hey, I love you. You look back and forth. Let's do this together. That's the kind of attitude that we have. It's not, hey, you made the bed funny today. Yeah, there's unity there. We're ready to go into the holy place. And remember the holy place? Remember those two pillars? It's the legs of mother. We're reversing the effects of the fall and going back into the womb. And once we're back into the womb, we're actually taking, like a fetus will do, we're taking the blood of the mother, which is the wine. And it is changing us into a new creature. See how you're reversing the effects? But if you don't offer an acceptable offering first and start doing this thing of acting like a son or daughter of God and teaching others about truth and everything, you're not going to be reborn. You're not going to have the effect of, like when an embryo starts being connected to the umbilical cord and being fed with that blood. That's the transformation that's happening in the holy place, guys. It's that which the fetus, which we are the new fetus. We're reborn. We become new creatures. Is it Omni? I believe it's Omni that says that. New creatures in Christ, because we have new blood coming into us. The blood in the wine is very, very significant. The effects of the wine is very, very significant. And I would say, if we don't experience the effects of the wine, certain things will never be brought to light, according to the pattern of things. So I hope I kind of got off track there, but that's the food. And you asked the good question. But initially at this point, the bread represents the fat and the blood. And usually I'd just say fat to not confuse, but it is a composite. There's actually not one without the other, but this is to be added upon. Because as soon as you ascend, then the blood, and think about when you're reborn, you actually get new blood. You have new parents. When you're reborn, you literally get new parents and you receive a new name. So if you want to find out when you're going to receive your new name, it's when you're reborn, because you have new parents. And what do new parents do? My kids that are new parents, they named their children Chloe and Poppy. If you want to get a new name, get reborn. Follow this path. Give your life. Become an administrator. Share things with other people. And then all of a sudden we could start entering into that whole place.
The bread is blood and what was it?
Well, think of the food of God that he needs to accept at this point.
Man and woman?
Oh yeah. Remember, God doesn't see a man and a woman separate. Ever.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
Because they're never in God's mind. If he looks at a man or a woman and he doesn't see their counterpart, their consort, in his mind, they're destroyed. It's really sad. You literally, when God looks at you, he cannot see you unless if you're in the image of God. Otherwise, in your mind, you're destroyed. So always, to answer your question, always, in order to ascend, we have to be in the image of God. Go back to the lecture 9. I know that we all have listened to it and read it many, many times. In order to ascend, you have to be in the image of God. Period. The image of God is male and female. There has to be a sacrament, so to speak, and marriage is a sacrament. That makes sense. So we're talking about what's the food of God that's acceptable to God, that in Ezekiel, he was saying, your stuff is gross. It's like you're feeding me like moldy bread. And when you burn your fat on the altar, it just smells. And it's like Yzma on the Emperor's New Groove in her teeth. How long has that been there? You know, you get that whole thing. It's just yucky. They're doing it the wrong way. And like I say, we're experiencing that right now. And those pretenders that Ezekiel is completely slamming, the shepherds, they're feeding their flock garbage. And so the flock is getting unhealthy, so to speak. And so there's the definition. I says, if you comprehend the symbol, it says, yes, in that sense, the blood and the fat were literally offered to him. It said, if you comprehend the symbol, the gospel splits wide open. And so with it, I put the right brain summary. And so this is kind of summarizing this, but in essence, the blood that we're supposed to offer, which means our life, is actually poured outside the outer courtyard into a temple drain, into the outer courtyard by way of a temple drain, I should have put, symbolizing the Spirit's separation, atonement, redemption, restitution. They're all pretty similar words from sin. When you start giving your life or your blood for your kids, for your fellowship, for covenant people, for those that are seeking Christ, a separation starts happening. And the effects of the atonement, redemption, restitution start settling in. So the fat, when turned into smoke, symbolizes the Spirit's ascension to him for acceptance. So when that division starts happening because you're literally giving your life to God, hungering and thirsting after righteousness, your fat, or that symbolism, is smelt by heaven. And things start, as Denver calls it, is put into motion. And then I said, God's food then is simply in the language of symbols. You have to get out your right brain. It means the separation, and I probably spelled this wrong. It's what the Jews say, James says, expiation from sin. I need to look at the word. Sorry, guys. But it's the separation. The Jews call it expiation or whatever from sin by the blood. And then the ascension starts happening of this purified soul. And once you get to that point, when you give a good offering, the Lord says, hey, go and teach these. Go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. And so I said, these are the things, or the food that God desires from his people. He wants our fat to be divided from our flesh, and for our fat, which is our soul, to be quickened so it can rise like smoke with hopefully a good smell. And then we get to the next part, and we get to the point of this rebirth, is when we enter in through those two pillars, Jachin and Boaz. Like Jen's license plate now is Boaz and mine is Jachin, to establish.
So I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So when you receive your new name through your new parents, that comes by his word.
Yeah, it's through the voice of the Spirit.
Through the voice of the Spirit, right?
Always.
And that's Father naming us.
That is our Father, whoever our Father is, naming us. And remember, we have this one figure that's called Father Abraham. And we also have this other figure too, which is Father Amen and Son Amen. And part of their thing is we actually need to receive a name. And depending upon where we came from, who were our parents before, and what we're born into also, will be who will be giving us our name. There's a lot to think about, and there's contextual, and Denver specifically doesn't go into it. But did you hear, guys, I loved his attitude, even though it was a little bit blunt, in Boise at the conference. He was talking about calling an election. He's like, big deal. What does that mean? Everyone thinks that's they like arrived somewhere. That just means that you can continue your ascent. Remember what he said when he's talking about calling an election in that Boise conference? It is important, but a lot of people just think, oh, I got that happen and now I've arrived and I'm going to just kind of get a lawn chair and and stop pressing forward. No, that just means that, hey, son and daughter, get to work. Here's the farm. Hey, pick up a hoe or a sickle and start thrusting it in, so to speak. Make sense?
And will our Father tell us what to go do on the farm? Really?
Yeah, that voice of the Spirit. Yeah, you'll get assignments. You'll know. And that's why the church was under condemnation, because they weren't paying attention to the New Covenant, which is the Book of Mormon, and they didn't hear the voice of the Spirit. They weren't connected to the parents.
You'll really know, like really know.
We talked about it when I was in Brooklyn's apartment. The voice of the Spirit is as thin as a gossamer's web. You need to pay attention and quiet your mind, but you'll know. It's like if you are a high school basketball player and everyone is screaming, you could still hear the voice of your coach. You'll know. You'll know. And they're also, remember, promise, covenant, law, ordinance, sign, token. Denver, in that chiasmus talk that Christine transcribed, mentioned a lot of times the answer is on your front lawn. And you need to figure out what that actually means. So that voice is there.
Add just a comment to that last comment you made. And it's on your front lawn, yet you're so distracted doing other things that are good things.
The what? One more time?
You're so distracted doing other things that are still good things. Right? They're not wrong things. Like in his example, it's not like the person was running around doing things they shouldn't do. They were just distracted doing those things and therefore didn't see the answer that was sitting on the front lawn.
Yep. So give your soul, and in the law of Moses, our soul is fat. Let this fat be quickened so it can ascend. And the thing is, a lot of times we think it's this thing that's just otherworldly that we're supposed to be doing. The first attention that God says, pay attention to your spouse. Priority number 1. Priority number 2, pay attention to your children. Priority number 3, pay attention to your closest relationships. And it's becoming to be more of a fellowship type thing. And it can be the extended family, mom and dad and brothers and sisters, extended family. It can be that. It depends on what that relationship is. And our work is in that. Generally speaking, it's in that. Eventually, we'll have some breakout assignment where you'll have something to do. Joseph had a Book of Mormon to translate, or they're one-off, but as soon as the assignment's given, it's taken away, and then you get right back to relationships, right? All right, so last couple slides, I want to talk about 2 things, and then we'll conclude. This one a little bit longer. But I wanted to go over that new name that we found, or that we learned about, and pertaining to the sweet savor. And I brought this up because we talked about it in sacrament meeting yesterday. There's that ruach, which is that breath. It's like the ha. And then there's the sweet savor. And so the spirit or soul needs to be a pleasing aroma to God. And it may seem strange that God smells, and there's symbolism too with the smell between the holy place and the Holy of Holies. There is a nose and nostrils there, by the way, that's smelling the altar of incense, if you want to go back and review that. But God does smell, which means his judgment he's like going, is their offering good? Have they been following the instructions? And they go, yeah, they have. All of the signs are there. It says the aromas and the offerings, they go up as clouds of smoke or incense. And it all portrays spirit or soul ascending or getting to the point where God can smell and be able to experience that's what's going on. And so quickly going over these things, Genesis 2:2, when you get into the first part of it, it talks about that the spirit, and it is translated in some translation as the ruach. It hovered over the waters in the creation period. In the lectures on faith, I was really trying to figure out how deep to get into in that creation aspect, because creation is really, very important. But in Genesis 2:2, it mentions that the spirit of the ruach hovered over the waters, and otherwise known as a wind, was blowing over the waters. It's significant. And I put the different translations. These are some of the things that are taken from what I've been learning lately with this Hebrew project going on. Ruach, which we learned, which the Davidic servant, David, has as his initial name, family name. Ruach is translated in Hebrew as wind, spirit, soul, or breath. And in the Polynesians, it's ha, it's the breath. And the Greek word is pneuma. That's why pneumonia has to do with breath. You can't breathe. It means spirit or wind. And so they're all the same type of root word or whatever. And they're tied to odor and smelling too, which is really interesting. And I got some of these out of some footnotes that are cool being part of this project. And so Genesis 5:20, it mentions the Lord smelled, or the riyah, the pleasing odor. And remember in this exchange, Genesis 9:15, when a blessing was supposed to be extended to twins, he smelled, or to Isaac at least, he smelled his garments. And it was very, very significant. He was judging him. It's colloquial words. And so this ruach, or sweet savor, this smell is really, really important. And the last aspects too, and then we'll conclude. And we talked about this yesterday with Jared. As many know, without air or wind, the ruach, it is impossible to smell any odor. There has to be movement of air. You can't smell pleasant or foul. If it's moving, you could smell it. And this is why the spirit or soul of man is portrayed as a cloud of smoke that's ascending up by heated air because of the effects of heat and fire. And because of that quickening, God could smell a pleasing aroma. Oh, and there's that thing too with Jared. The smoke is a result of combustion, or quickening, as Jared mentioned yesterday to me. The symbol merely serves to make the hot air visible and aromatically detectable because of the quickening. If our soul is becoming quickened, it gets the attention of heaven, like in lecture 10. So it's important.
About that, but I don't remember it being my idea.
Oh, it's when we were in my den, sitting in the chair, and you says, "Oh, like the quickening."
I know. I just feel uncomfortable when people point out my name.
Well, it's going to happen more and more. If as you give crappy advice, I'll never bring your name up. Good advice, it's going to happen probably more and more. when it's reliable and trustworthy. Yeah, but me, myself, and I, it's not good. But yeah, witnesses are good. We have to witness, right?
That's true. That's very true.
And so the symbol merely serves to make the hot air visible or detectable aromatically, right? And like I said, it's important to observe that nowhere written the smoke of flesh, the sin offering, is ever good. It was never good. And what's the last thing I put in here? We could suspect, let me see what my thought process were. We could suspect that it was because symbolically sin would have a foul stench of, that sin would have a foul stench, have the foul stench of sin. If sin smells, not the sweet aroma of ascending soul, ascending or well-pleasing spiritual life of an offer. So in essence, to get to this point where we have an acceptable offering and we can move onward into between, be reborn, go through the two pillars, which are the legs, and you enter into the new womb. If you want to continue that progress, we have to be willing to give our life, our blood. And we have to do it in the way that God has asked us to do it, following a specific pattern that we went over. And the patterns that we talked about, wrapping up, there are these offerings. And it's this part of having, because it's always the law of sacrifice, right? The offering is always sacrificing, giving up something. What's the law of sacrifice? Giving up something of lesser value for something of greater value. And eventually we'll give up our life in general, our complete life. If we're willing to do that, God will know. And we could receive the greatest of all endowments or blessings or light or truth if we're willing to give that type of offering.
What just came to my mind is, so there, there's the three natural cycles. There's the water cycle, and then the carbon and oxygen cycle, and the nitrogen cycle. And so with what you've said tonight, it's kind of like the carbon oxygen cycle, because, right, like when something dies, it no longer has oxygen, but then when it's burned, it gives off its combustion and gives off smoke, which would be the carbon. Is that the cycle that this is, how it relates? I'm just trying to see it in Christ, like how that, because I can see the water cycle with Christ. I'm just thinking out loud. Sorry.
And this is where I'm not good, because chemistry has been a long time. I know CO2 and carbon, and there's a division where carbon is separated and oxygen is there too. And there's that separation. So as you said it, my mind was like going over the principles. There has to be a separation. Carbon is separated from oxygen, just like flesh is separated from blood and fat. And there has to be something. And the only way that happens is through heat, right?
Oh.
And the altar, the bronze burnt altar, the burning altar, provides the heat. And in order for evaporation, carbon cycle, and I'm not very good, it's been so long since I've been into chemistry and everything else, but there has to be a heat to be able to have that separation, acting as a knife, so to speak, to quicken. But there has to be some process. But
so knife, like in the scripture, the knife is a good way to think of it, as like a separation.
Yeah, it is the separator. And remember that sword that was hanging above that table? This was, who knows if it's reliable, but Brigham Young mentioned that at one time Emma was relating when she was able to go with Joseph to drop off the plates and give it back. And there was table with wagon loads of plates and records. And above the table where those plates were laid, there was a sword. He said it was Laban's sword. And it said, "This sword shall not be sheathed until all of the enemies of righteousness are divided." Meaning all sin has been removed from flesh. And it's not going to be sheathed until the knife is going to be there. And it's that knife it's a two-edged sword that cuts both ways.
So that makes so much sense in like Nephi's vision too, then. The sword of justice.
Oh, yes. It is.
Because it separates. Yeah. Okay.
And so remember, and so you're getting it too, there has to be a separation of flesh and soul, body and soul. There has to be a separation, period. God is kind of going over how it happens, or how it's possible to follow the correct instructions to have a quickening, to make it so that we could actually have that happen, to go to the sacred space above, being quickened, because sin has been removed, which is blood and flesh, right? And to be able to ascend up and to receive certain things that that God is just waiting and anxious to share with us. But he says, you got to follow the instructions. If you don't follow the instructions, you have no promise. All blessings are predicated upon obedience to that law, that instructions. And these, if we get into it, even though it's very right brain, and he says, oh, this is the old law and whatever, it's like, it is the old law. Yes, it is. But is it symbolically rich? Absolutely. And so this kind of gives some of the deeper right-brained symbolism of what is really going on to be able to finally get to the point of being pure. And what does it say in the temples? And it's from the DNC. The pure of heart shall see God. And so this purification, the sin offering, it purifies us. And then all of a sudden, God could suddenly come to his temple, which temple ye are. And that stuff starts happening. So anyway, that's what I wanted to share. Now that I have some brain cycles. And unless there's any other comments, we could conclude. I'll stop the recording.